There is a moment in Family Guy where Brian Griffin, the family dog, rises in a courtroom, sworn in and under oath, and informs the judge that Meg is not Peter's biological child. He states that her real father is a man called Stan Thompson. He says it plainly. Peter backs him up. The line is not a gag. It is not a cutaway. It is genuine, shown on screen, made official. And the show has never returned to it since. For over 2 decades, every member of the Griffin household has been aware of the truth. Everyone except Meg herself. That is not a plot hole the writers accidentally overlooked. That is a plot hole the writers deliberately decided to bury. And it is only one out of dozens exactly like it. Tonight, we are working our way through every major plot hole Family Guy has ever generated. Retconned fathers, faked deaths, a pregnancy that dragged on for a decade, a dog with 3 separate origins. Welcome to Red Umbrella. Let's begin. The 2 fathers of Peter Griffin, Francis, Mickey, and the retcon that shattered a family tree. To grasp how deep this one runs, you have to go back to the start. The earliest seasons of Family Guy hand us Francis Griffin. He is Peter's father. That is what the show insists for years. Francis first appears in a Season 2 episode titled Holy Crap, broadcast in 1999. He is cold. He is bitter. He is a devout Catholic who regards Peter as a failure. He lives in a retirement home, and he treats Peter like something he scraped off his shoe. The entire episode hinges on the premise that this man is Peter's dad, and that their bond is damaged. Peter craves his father's love. Francis refuses to give it. Francis returns in later episodes. He turns up in Peter's flashbacks, in Peter's memories, at family gatherings. Anytime the show needs to discuss where Peter came from, Francis is present. He is not a one-off joke. He is a recurring figure stitched into Peter's backstory across several seasons and several writing teams. Peter calls him Dad. Lois calls him Dad. Chris, Meg, and Stewie call him Grandpa. Now, here is where it all starts to come apart. 6 seasons on, the show airs an episode called Peter's 2 Dads. This is Season 5, Episode 10, from February 2007. The episode opens on Meg's birthday party. Peter gets drunk. Peter tries to ride a unicycle down the stairs. Peter smashes into Francis, and Francis dies. His final words, delivered straight to Peter's face in the hospital, are that Peter is a fat, stinking drunk. That is the end of Francis Griffin. Now, a normal show would leave it there. A normal show would give Peter an episode to grieve and then move forward. Family Guy does something else entirely. Family Guy decides that Francis was never Peter's real father to begin with. After Francis dies, Brian tells Peter to go see a hypnotherapist. Under hypnosis, Peter recalls that Francis had told him many times he was not his biological father. Peter had never really processed those memories before, but now they all come rushing back. Peter goes to his mother, Thelma, and asks her who his real father is, and Thelma tells him the truth. She had an affair with an Irishman named Mickey McFinnigan during a vacation in Ireland, and Mickey is Peter's actual biological dad. So Peter and Brian fly to Ireland. They track down Mickey in a small village pub. Mickey is a drunk. Mickey is loud. Mickey looks almost identical to Peter, just with a beard and wilder hair. At first, Mickey refuses to accept that Peter is his son, so Peter challenges him to a drinking contest. Peter wins, and Mickey embraces him as blood. This is the point where the show turns its own story inside out, because for 6 seasons, every single time we saw Peter's family history, Francis was the father. Francis raised him. Francis was in the flashbacks. Francis was the reason Peter had the personality he has. And now the show is telling us, actually, none of that matters, because Peter shares no DNA at all with Francis. Peter inherited every one of his traits from Mickey. That is why Peter is a fat drunk. That is why Peter is the way he is. Not because of how Francis raised him, but because of Irish blood. Okay, on its own, this would just be a soap opera-style twist. Shows pull this kind of thing all the time. A character discovers their real dad is someone else. Fine. But here is where the plot hole cracks wide open. Because across the first 5 seasons of Family Guy, the show constructed an entire extended family tree on Peter's side. Not a small one, an enormous one. Peter has cousins. Peter has uncles. Peter has ancestors. And every single one of them carries the Griffin surname. And every single one of them looks exactly like Peter. The most famous example comes from a season 3 episode called Peter Griffin, husband, father, brother. In that episode, Peter learns that one of his ancestors was a black slave named Nate Griffin who lived in the 19th century. Nate Griffin looks exactly like Peter. Same face shape, same body, same mannerisms. The whole story only functions because Nate is Peter's direct blood ancestor on the Griffin side. Except, under the new rules established by Peter's 2 dads, Nate Griffin cannot be Peter's ancestor at all, because Peter is not a Griffin by blood. Peter is a McFinnigan. Francis is the one carrying the Griffin bloodline. Peter just has the name. And it is not only Nate. Family Guy has paraded a whole gallery of Peter's Griffin relatives over the years. There is a Pilgrim Griffin. There is a Cowboy Griffin. There is a Roman Griffin. There is a prehistoric cave Griffin. There is a medieval Griffin. The running gag is that Peter's family stretches back through every era of human history, and every single one of them is a fat, loud, stupid version of Peter himself. After the retcon, none of these people should look like Peter. None of them should share his face. None of them should share his body, because Peter does not carry the Griffin genes. He carries the McFinnigan genes. If you ran Peter's DNA against any of these historical Griffins, it would come back as a stranger. The show never fixes this. It just carries on. In later seasons, the show still uses the same gag. It still shows Peter's ancestors as people who look exactly like him. It still calls them Griffins. It still treats them as his blood. Nothing about Peter's 2 dads is ever allowed to actually change anything. And the Mickey McFinnigan story itself is also a plot hole, because Mickey only ever has one on-screen son. That is Peter. Mickey lives in a tiny Irish village. He is the town drunk. He never left. So, where did all the identical-looking Griffin ancestors come from, if not from the Griffin side? The math does not add up. You cannot have a family full of fat, Peter-faced men stretching back 1,000 years, and also have Peter only share blood with a man living in an Irish village in the 1960s. One of those things has to be false. The show wants both to be true. Now we have to add another layer, because Family Guy already had an even earlier contradiction baked into Peter's origin story before Peter's 2 dads even aired. Going back to season 6, there is an episode called Padre de Familia. In this one, Peter discovers that he was actually born in Mexico. His mother, Thelma, the same mother we just discussed, tried to get an abortion during a trip to Mexico City. Something went wrong with the procedure, and she gave birth to Peter on the spot. She then smuggled the baby back into the United States, which means Peter is, by birth, an undocumented immigrant. He is not even legally American. Consider what this does to the full timeline. Thelma is pregnant with Peter. She travels to Mexico. She gives birth. She sneaks the baby home to Rhode Island. And then, somewhere in this same timeline, she also has an affair with an Irishman in Ireland who is the baby's actual father. So Thelma got pregnant in Ireland, or with an Irishman, then went to Mexico to try to end the pregnancy, then gave birth there by accident, then smuggled the baby into the United States, and then raised him alongside her husband Francis, whom she had told the baby was his biological dad. The problem is that in the original Holy Crap episode, Peter talks about growing up in Providence, Rhode Island, under Francis. His entire childhood is portrayed as an American Catholic upbringing. Nobody mentions Mexico. Nobody mentions Ireland. Nobody mentions that Peter was smuggled across a border as a newborn. The Mexico storyline and the Ireland storyline were bolted on top of an already finished childhood, and they do not fit inside it. There is also the name problem. In a later episode, Quagmire's Mom, it is revealed that Peter's actual legal birth name is Justin Peter Griffin, not Peter Justin. Nobody has ever called him Justin across more than 2 decades of the show. His wife does not call him Justin. His friends do not call him Justin. His kids do not call him Justin. The show drops this detail and then strolls away from it as though it never said it. And the clearest sign that the show knows it has made a mess of this is how Mickey McFinnigan himself gets treated afterward. In Peter's Two Dads, the whole point is that Peter has finally found his real father, and they bond, and there is an emotional moment where Peter sings an Irish song with him in the pub. This is meant to be a huge emotional turning point for Peter. After that episode, Mickey barely appears again. He gets a brief mention in a later Quagmire episode. He shows up in archive footage, but he never becomes a real recurring character the way Francis was. The show simply used him for one big twist and then shelved him. Meanwhile, Francis, the man the show spent 6 seasons building up as Peter's dad, keeps returning after his death as a ghost. In Family Guy, his ghost comes back to tell Peter to stop being Jewish. In Coma Guy, he appears in a hallucination. The dead fake father is more present in Peter's life than the living real one. And in even later seasons, the show quietly forgets the whole thing. Episodes reference Peter being a Griffin, the Griffin family line, Peter's ancestors, Peter being Irish because of the Griffin side rather than the McFinnigan side. Peter will mention his dad in a cutaway, and the person he pictures is Francis, not Mickey. The McFinnigan retcon is treated like a dream the show half remembers having. This is the pattern that is going to keep surfacing throughout this video. Family Guy does not just have small mistakes. It does not just have little details that fail to line up. It has huge, load-bearing pieces of its own story that have been openly contradicted, and then the show just keeps going as if nothing happened. Peter has 2 fathers. Both of them are canon. Neither of them makes sense alongside the other, and the entire extended family of Griffins that Peter supposedly descends from is a genetic impossibility under the show's own rules. Peter's origin story is a tangle. He was born in Mexico but raised in Rhode Island. His legal father was Francis Griffin, but his blood father was Mickey McFinnigan. His real first name is Justin, but nobody ever calls him that. His ancestors are a line of fat, loud Griffins stretching back through history, but he does not actually share their blood. You cannot pull any one of these threads without the others unraveling. The show has simply chosen not to pull them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And if you think that is strange, wait until you hear about the dog. Because Peter is not the only member of this family with a scrambled origin story. Brian Griffin has at least 3 of them, and one of those stories has him appearing in the Griffin family photo album as a puppy years before the episode that is supposed to be the day he met them. Section 2. Brian's 3 origin stories: the stray, the Texas farm, and the puppy who was always there. If Peter has 2 fathers, Brian has 3 different lives, and each one cancels out the other 2. Let's start at the beginning, because Brian's first origin story is the one the show itself calls official. It comes from a Season 1 episode titled Brian, Portrait of a Dog, from 1999. This is where Family Guy tells us, plainly and on screen, how Brian ended up living with the Griffins. In the flashback, we see Peter driving down a road in Rhode Island. On the side of that road is a homeless Brian, fully grown, washing car windshields for spare change. Peter feels sorry for him. Peter stops the car. Peter offers Brian a home. Brian accepts. That is it. That is the story. A grown adult dog living on the street gets picked up by Peter and brought back to the Griffin house. No family, no history, no past owner, just a stray Peter rescued one day in Quahog. This story is treated as true for years. It gets referenced in later episodes. It gets used to explain why Brian feels such loyalty toward Peter. Peter is the one who saved him. Peter took him off the street. That is the bond. Then season 2 rolls around, and the show decides to rewrite the entire thing. The episode is called Road to Rhode Island. It aired in May 2000, and it gives Brian a completely new backstory. In this one, Brian was born on a farm in Austin, Texas. His mother was a dog named Biscuit. His father was a guard dog named Coco. He was part of a litter. When Brian was very young, only a few weeks old, he was taken away from his mother. Brian spent years believing she had abandoned him, which the show says is the reason he has so many emotional problems as an adult. Brian then somehow made his way from Texas all the way up to Rhode Island. He ended up attending Brown University, a real Ivy League college in Providence. He did not graduate. He was one class short of his degree. And after leaving Brown, he became the stray that Peter found on the side of the road in the first origin story. Now, on the surface, these two stories can kind of coexist. You can sort of squint and say, okay, maybe Brian had this whole Texas childhood, then this whole college experience, then he became homeless, and then Peter found him. The timeline is weird, but you can make it work if you really want to. Except Road to Rhode Island itself starts breaking its own story. In the same episode, Brian goes back to the dog pound in Texas to try to find his real mother, Biscuit. He learns that Biscuit has died, and he learns what happened to her body. The pound took her remains, stuffed her, and turned her into a side table, a piece of furniture. Brian finds this table in a family's home in Texas. He and Stewie steal the table so they can give her a proper burial. This scene treats Brian's connection to Biscuit as deeply emotional. It treats his Texas origin as the center of who he is. His abandonment by his mother is presented as the thing that made him the dog he is today. This is a completely different soul from the one established in the original Stray story. That Brian had no past. This Brian has a dead mother and a whole emotional history in another state. Now we get to the third origin story, and this one breaks both of the others. It comes from a season 7 episode called The Man with Two Brians, which aired in November 2008. In this episode, Brian is injured trying to do something stupid, and Peter decides to replace him with a new dog. The new dog is named New Brian. The family has to decide which Brian they want to keep. In the middle of this episode, the Griffins sit down to watch old home videos. They pull out a box of family tapes, the kind that parents record of their kids growing up. And in these videos, we see Peter as a young man, Lois as a young woman, their kids as babies, and right there in the same home videos is Brian as a puppy, already living with the family. This is a direct, on-screen contradiction. The original Portrait of a Dog story says Peter found Brian as a full-grown adult stray just 2 or 3 years before the show started. The Road to Rhode Island story says Brian was born in Texas and only came to the Griffins after college and a stretch of homelessness. But these home videos from Two Brians show Brian as a tiny puppy in the Griffin house with a young Peter and Lois, at a time that would be decades before either of the other stories could have happened. The show never addresses this. Nobody in the episode says, "Wait, Brian was not a puppy when we got him." Nobody says, "This does not match what we told you before." The home video just plays, and the show moves on. So now we have 3 Brians. The first Brian is the adult stray picked up off the road in Rhode Island 3 years before the show started. The second Brian is the Texas farm puppy, taken from his mother, raised elsewhere, sent to Brown, and then became the stray. The third Brian was raised inside the Griffin house since he was a puppy, years before either of the other 2 stories could have happened. Only one of these can be true. The show says all 3 are true. That is the plot hole. And it gets worse, because Brian's age is a whole separate contradiction on top of his origin. In a Season 2 episode called Brian in Love, Brian states his age directly. He says he is 7 years old, and if he plays his cards right, he has about 7 more years left. That is a dog's normal lifespan, 7 years old, maybe 14 if he is lucky. Clear, simple, factual. Then, in The Man with 2 Brians, he is said to be 8 years old. Okay, a year passed. That makes sense. Except Family Guy runs on what is called a floating timeline, which means the show itself does not really age. Years pass in the real world, but on the show, everyone stays roughly the same. So Brian being 7 in one episode and 8 in another is already weird, because no real time is supposed to have gone by. And then, in later seasons, the show starts joking about Brian being much, much older. In one episode, the guys at the bar are complaining that they cannot drink because some of them are too young. Brian is actually allowed to drink, the joke goes, because in dog years, he is 56. That puts him somewhere around 8 human years old, but still older than everyone else in the room. Except then, Quagmire's age gets raised in the same bar scene, and it does not add up. We will get to Quagmire's age problem in a later section, but the point is that Brian's age keeps shifting depending on the joke the writers want to tell. He is 7, he is 8, he is 56. He is sometimes presented as having memories that stretch back decades, including hanging out with artists in the 1970s, which would make him old enough to be a grandfather dog. Let's go back to the home video problem, because it is the biggest one, and it deserves more time. The Man with 2 Brians shows puppy Brian in the Griffin house. Okay, now consider when those home videos would have been filmed. Peter looks young, Lois looks young, their kids are babies in the footage. Meg is the oldest Griffin child, and she is a teenager when the show starts. So the home videos would have to be filmed at least 15 years before the present day of the show, which means, according to these videos, Brian has been with the Griffins for 15 or more years, which means the stray origin story is a lie, because Peter could not have picked Brian up on the side of the road just a couple years before the show started if he had been with the family for over a decade already. And it means the Texas farm origin story is also a lie, because Brian could not have grown up on a farm in Austin and attended Brown University if he was a puppy in Rhode Island the entire time. The only way to make any of this work is to admit that one of the stories is fake. The show refuses to do that. All 3 are presented as real. All 3 are part of Brian's background. None of them match. There is another detail worth mentioning here. In a later episode called Send in Stewie, Please, which is mostly about Stewie, Brian is briefly referenced in a way that treats him as though he has been with the family all along, since before Stewie was born. This supports the home video version of events, but it still fails to explain the other 2 origins. And this does not even touch the Brian death problem, which we are going to cover in its own section later, because when Brian dies and comes back to life, the show piles yet another layer of confusion on top of everything we are discussing right now. Here is the pattern. Family Guy treats Brian's backstory like a buffet. The writers pick whichever version suits the joke they're telling that week. If they need a sad story about a dog losing his mother, they pull out the Texas farm story. If they need a story about a stray being rescued, they pull out the portrait of a dog version. If they need home video footage for a gag, they drop Brian in as a puppy, whether or not it matches anything else. None of this is an accident. The show knows it is doing this. In the episode called Back to the Pilot, which we will cover later, Brian and Stewie actually travel back in time to the first episode of the series. They stand outside the old Griffin house and watch their younger selves. Stewie mocks how different everything looked back then. Brian mocks how strange the old jokes were. The show is openly laughing at its own past. It does not care whether things line up, it just wants the joke. But for a sleep essay, for someone sitting there watching this for the 5th time, those inconsistencies pile up. And once you notice them, they get louder. Because think about what Brian's story is supposed to mean. Brian is presented as the thinking voice of the Griffin household. He is the one who reads. He is the one who writes novels that never get published. He is the one who talks about politics. He is the one who goes to therapy. He is, in the writer's eyes, the smart one, the one with the richest inner life, the character with the deepest past. And yet that past is a broken mirror. It is 3 separate origin stories stitched onto the same character, none of them compatible. And the show does not choose between them. It keeps all 3. It uses whichever one it wants in the moment. The dog that everyone treats as the emotional center of the Griffin family is the one character whose history the show cannot even keep straight for a single season. There is one more small thing worth mentioning, and it is almost funny in how casual it is. In the DVD commentary for one of the Brian-centered episodes, the writers discuss the letter H in Brian's middle initial. At one point, he is referred to as H. Brian Griffin, and later, Brian Edward Griffin. The writers openly admit that the H stands for nothing. They just tacked it on to make Brian sound more pretentious. So even the man's middle name is a joke that contradicts the rest of his name. He is called Brian Edward in one source and H. Brian in another. The show has 2 different full names for the same dog, and the writers have essentially confessed to inventing one of them for flavor. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. All of this is the groundwork for something even bigger, because Brian is not the only character whose backstory keeps shifting beneath the show's own feet. The biggest offender is the baby. A baby whose head was either always shaped like a football or got that way from hitting a ceiling. A baby who was supposed to be British but turns out to have been faking the accent the whole time. A baby whose entire coming out story got deleted by the network before it could air. Stewie's biography is even messier than Brian's, and the contradictions are wired into the very first season. Section 3. Stewie's impossible biography, the football head, the matricide, and the vanishing British accent. Stewie Griffin is the most complicated character in Family Guy. He is also the character with the most broken backstory, and the breaks happen almost immediately. Within the first 3 seasons of the show, Stewie has already been handed 2 different birth stories, 2 different explanations for the shape of his head, and a sexuality arc that was filmed, finished, and then deleted before it could air. Let's start with the head. If you have ever watched Family Guy, you have noticed that Stewie's head is not round. It is long. It is shaped like an American football. Nobody else in the show has a head like this. Peter's head is round. Lois's head is oval. Chris and Meg have normal cartoon heads. Stewie's head is a football. It is one of the most recognizable parts of his design. Now, in a season 1 episode called Chitty Chitty Death Bang, which aired in 1999, we get flashbacks to Stewie's birth. And in these flashbacks, his head is already football-shaped. From the moment he emerges from Lois, he looks exactly the way he does in the present day of the show. Same head, same shape, same proportions. The implication is clear. Stewie was born with a football head. That is just how he was made. Fine, simple enough. Then we get to season 3, in an episode called Stuck Together, Torn Apart. In this episode, there is a cutaway gag that shows a younger Stewie before his head was shaped like a football. In this version, baby Stewie has a completely normal, round head. He is bouncing on a bed, his head hits the ceiling, and the force of hitting the ceiling squashes his skull upward, stretching it into the football shape we know. So now, the show is telling us two different things about the same character's head. In one version, he was born this way. In the other version, he got this way from an accident. Both versions are presented on screen as real. Both versions are supposed to be canon. They cannot both be true. If he was born with a football head, then he could not have gotten it from hitting the ceiling. If he got it from hitting the ceiling, then the birth flashback should have shown a normal-headed baby. The show does not pick between them. It just keeps using both. Now, let's move to something even bigger, Stewie's accent. From the very first episode of Family Guy, Stewie has been a character with a specific voice. He speaks in an upper-class British accent. He uses words no one-year-old would ever use. He says things like, "What the deuce," and "damn you all." His voice is modeled on the English actor Rex Harrison, especially his performance in an old musical film. The creator of the show, Seth MacFarlane, has said this in interviews many times. Stewie's voice is one of the defining things about him. It is the joke, a tiny baby with the voice and vocabulary of a cranky British aristocrat. Everyone who watches the show knows this voice. It is the reason he became the most popular character. It is the reason he has appeared on every piece of Family Guy merchandise ever made. Then, in season 16, the show airs an episode called Send in Stewie, Please. This episode is a therapy session. Stewie goes to see a child psychologist voiced by Sir Ian McKellen. It is one of the most talked about episodes of the show's later years. And in the middle of this session, Stewie drops a piece of information that breaks everything we thought we knew about him. His British accent is fake. He admits it right there, in the therapy room. He says he has been putting on the accent his entire life. He is not actually British. His real voice is an American accent. And then, to really drive the joke home, he starts speaking in other voices too. Voices that sound like other characters from Seth MacFarlane's other shows. The gag is that Stewie can do any voice, and the British one was simply the one he chose to use. Now, is this a plot hole, or is it just a joke the show is making at its own expense? That is the question. And the answer is that it is both, and the show does not get to pick. Because if Stewie's accent is fake, then every single flashback to his early life is now broken. Remember, we have seen Stewie as a newborn. We have seen his first words. In a later episode called Stewie's First Word, we watch him say his very first word in a church. He says it in the British accent. But if that accent is something he chose to put on, then no newborn baby would have picked it. Newborns do not choose accents. Newborns copy the voices around them. Stewie's parents are American. His siblings are American. He grew up in Rhode Island. The British accent makes no sense as a natural choice. So either the send in Stewie, please reveal is a lie, and Stewie really is British somehow, or the flashbacks are wrong, and baby Stewie should have sounded American from the beginning. The show presents both as canon. Both are on screen. You cannot make them work together. Now, let's talk about Stewie's sexuality, because this is where the plot hole becomes an entire deleted episode. From season 1 onward, Stewie drops hints that he might be gay. These are not small hints. In 15 Minutes of Shame, he says he does not really like women, and that it would be interesting if he turned out to be gay. In Chick Cancer, he says sex is, in his words, a kind of cake, showing he does not even understand what sex is. But he also says at the end of the episode that he could get into being gay. In later episodes, he keeps a photo of actor Chris Nuth in his wallet. He has a screensaver of a muscular man on his phone. He tells Brian repeatedly that he finds men attractive. These are not background gags. The show puts real weight on them. Seth MacFarlane has said in a magazine interview that the writers always thought of Stewie as almost certainly gay. They wrote him as a gay character. They simply kept it ambiguous because they liked having the option to write jokes from both sides. Here is where it gets interesting. In the early years of the show, the writers actually wrote, animated, and completed an episode called Queer is Stewie. In this episode, Stewie was going to come out of the closet officially as gay. This was going to be the moment where the show finally answered the question it had been teasing for 3 seasons. And then, the show got cancelled. Family Guy was cancelled for the first time in 2002, after its 3rd season. The Queer is Stewie episode was never aired. It just sat there, finished, but unused. When the show came back in 2005, the writers decided to scrap the whole idea. They no longer wanted to lock Stewie into a single identity because they felt the ambiguity gave them more jokes. So the episode was shelved permanently. Parts of it were later reworked into a different episode where Stewie meets his future self, but the coming out story itself was removed. This creates a strange situation for the show's canon. An episode was made in which Stewie was officially gay. That episode was never broadcast. So, is it canon or not? The writers talked about it openly. They described what happened in it. Fans know about it, but it never aired. The show instead kept Stewie ambiguous for another 15 years, until Send in Stewie, Please finally hinted at an answer without actually giving one. And the answer in Send in Stewie, Please is strange too, because at the very end of the episode, after revealing his accent is fake, Stewie also reveals that he feels alone, afraid nobody will like him, and that he has been hiding his real self. The show presents this as a serious moment, but then Stewie chooses to keep hiding. He does not come out. He puts the accent back on. He walks out of the therapy office pretending to be the same old Stewie. The show treats this as sad, not funny. And then, in every episode after, he is back to normal. The therapy session is never mentioned again. The emotional weight simply disappears. Now, let's look at the biggest plot hole in Stewie's history, the 2-episode story where he actually succeeds in killing Lois. In Season 6, the show airs a 2-parter called Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie. For the entire run of Family Guy up to this point, Stewie's main joke has been that he wants to kill his mother. He builds weapons, he makes plans, he fails every time. It is the running joke from the pilot episode onward. So when the show announced that these 2 episodes would actually show Stewie succeed, it was a huge deal. Fans expected a real change. In the first part, Stewie murders Lois on a cruise ship. She falls overboard. She is presumed dead. Stewie celebrates. He then tries to take over the world. Peter is arrested for her murder, put on trial, and found guilty. At the end of the first episode, Lois walks into the courtroom alive and accuses Stewie of trying to kill her. She had survived. In the second part, Stewie and Lois have a massive drawn-out fight. Stewie finally kills her for real. Then Peter, Chris, Meg, Brian, and the gang hunt Stewie down. Stewie kills most of his family. He declares himself ruler of the world. He seems to have won. And then, at the very end of the second episode, the camera pulls back. We find out the entire 2-part story was a simulation. It was a computer program Stewie had been running to test whether his plan would work. None of it really happened. Everyone is fine. Lois is alive, Peter is alive, Stewie is back in his crib, annoyed that the simulation showed him failing because Lois came back to catch him. This is the cleanest example of the show writing a huge storyline and then just deleting it with 1 line of dialogue. The 2 episodes were promoted heavily. They were built up as a major event, and when the moment came, the show just said, "Actually, none of this counts. It was all fake. Move on." The writers of the show have admitted this was a cop-out. They say they did not know how to end the story, so they made it a simulation. But from a continuity standpoint, it means the show openly erased 2 full episodes of its own history. Characters died, cities were destroyed, Stewie ruled the planet, and then a voice said, "Just kidding," and everything went back to normal. No memories were kept, no consequences stuck. Stewie has a similar problem with his body and his age. He is meant to be a baby, 1 year old. That is the joke. And he has stayed 1 year old for more than 20 real-world years, which fits the show's floating timeline. But then, in specific episodes, he ages. In Life of Brian. 2. Revival Reversal, which aired in Season 16, he finally turns 2. That is 15 seasons after his first birthday, which means he was 1 year old for roughly 15 years of the show, and then aged 1 year in a single episode for no real reason. After that episode, he is sometimes still treated as 1, sometimes as 2, depending on what the joke needs. And his language keeps shifting too. He has been shown multiple times to not know what sex is. In Chick Cancer, he thinks sex is a type of cake. In a later episode called Valentine's Day in Quahog, he is horrified when he accidentally walks in on his parents having sex because he does not understand what he is seeing. But in other episodes, Stewie talks about sex in great detail, fantasizes about specific acts, and displays clear knowledge of how relationships work. He cannot both fully understand sex and also believe it is a kind of cake. All of these problems stack on top of each other. His head has 2 origin stories. His accent is either real or fake, and the show has shown both. His coming out was written and deleted. His murder of Lois was written and deleted. His age is frozen for 15 seasons, and then jumps. His sexual knowledge changes based on the episode. Almost nothing about Stewie is stable, and yet he is the most popular character the show has ever produced. He is on more merchandise than anyone else. He is getting his own spin-off, which was announced recently. He is the face of Family Guy, and the face of Family Guy has a biography the show has contradicted more times than any other character. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Stewie problem is bad enough on its own, but it is nothing compared to what happened in a courtroom in Season 3, when Brian stood up under oath and said that one of Peter's children is not actually Peter's child at all. He named the real father. He gave the man's full name. And then the show spent the next 20 years pretending it never happened. Section 4. Meg's real father is Stan Thompson, and the show just walked away. In a Season 3 episode called Screwed the Pooch, which aired in November 2001, Brian gets caught up in a custody battle. He has, through a series of events most people would rather not think about, fathered a litter of puppies with Seabreeze, the prize-winning greyhound owned by Lois's father, Carter Pewterschmidt. Carter wants the puppies. Brian wants the puppies. The whole thing ends up in a courtroom, with a judge deciding whether Brian is a fit father. Peter, trying to help Brian, testifies on his behalf. He tells the court that Brian is an amazing father, that Brian knows everything about children, that Brian knows things not even Peter, a biological father of 3, knows about his own kids. Peter then tries to prove this by asking Brian a series of questions about the Griffin children, things only a really attentive dad would know. Brian answers each one perfectly. Peter asks what Stewie's favorite bedtime story is. Brian answers, "Goodnight Moon." Peter asks what Chris's favorite ice cream flavor is. Brian answers. Peter asks about other small details. Brian gets them all right. And then Peter asks the final question. He asks, "And what is Meg's real father's name?" Brian answers without hesitation. He says the name Stan Thompson. And Peter, in front of the whole courtroom, says, "All right, pal," and celebrates that Brian knew the answer. That is the scene. That is how it happens. No joke punchline follows. No reveal that Peter was making a sarcastic guess. No cutaway. No reset. The courtroom moves on. Brian wins the custody case. The episode ends. Meg is in the same room during this exchange. She is sitting right there. But Meg is wearing headphones. She is listening to music on her Discman. She does not hear a single word of what Brian and Peter just said. The audience hears it. The judge hears it. Everyone in the courtroom hears it. The only person in the Griffin family who is in the dark is Meg herself. This is the plot hole. The show has told us, on screen, in a courtroom, under oath, that Meg is not Peter's biological daughter. Her real father is a man named Stan Thompson. Peter knows this. Lois knows this. Brian knows this. Even Chris and Stewie seem to know, because in later episodes the rest of the family quietly references Stan Thompson as if they are all in on the secret. In a season 7 episode called Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, Brian is arguing about religion with the rest of the family. During the argument, he points out that if there were no God, then Meg would already know the truth about Stan Thompson. The rest of the family immediately shushes him. They know. All of them know. The only person who does not know is Meg. In the season 5 episode Peter's Two Dads, which we talked about earlier, there is a moment where Peter connects his own situation to Meg's. He says out loud, "This is just like me and Stan Thompson." He says it in front of Meg. He then panics, realizing he has just accidentally revealed the biggest secret the family has been keeping. So he pulls out a device, like the one from the Men in Black movies, and wipes Meg's memory of what he just said. That memory wipe is played as a joke, but it is a joke built on top of a plot the show refuses to resolve. Here is why this is such a massive plot hole. Family Guy is a show that talks about everything. It makes jokes about death, religion, war, race, politics, celebrity scandals, and every taboo subject a cartoon can touch. It is not a show that shies away from a storyline. If the writers wanted to do a full episode about Meg finding out she was not Peter's real daughter, they could have done it any time in the last 20+ years. They have not. Stan Thompson has never appeared on screen, not once. The show has not shown his face, it has not given him a voice, it has not told us where he lives, what he does, how Lois met him, or why he left. He is a name in a courtroom and nothing else. He exists only as a punchline the show keeps almost telling, but never finishing. The question this opens up is enormous. If Meg is not Peter's biological daughter, then the entire relationship between Meg and Peter across the show is different. Every time Peter has been mean to Meg, and he has been very mean to Meg over hundreds of episodes, we now have to ask whether that cruelty carries a different meaning. Does Peter know she is not his? Is that why he treats her the way he does? Or does he genuinely love her as a daughter, and the Stan Thompson thing simply does not matter to him? The show does not answer. It just drops the bomb and walks away. And here is where it gets even messier, because Meg's birth, across the history of the show, is told to us in at least 4 completely different ways. The first version is in a season 1 episode called I Never Met the Dead Man. In that episode, we see a flashback to Meg being born. Peter is disappointed when the doctor tells him it is a girl. He asks the doctor to check again. It is played as a joke. In this flashback, Meg is a normal baby born to Peter and Lois at a hospital. The second version comes from a much later episode, Friends Without Benefits. In that one, it is revealed that Meg was born with her heart on top of her head, and she wears her pink hat to hide it. This is almost certainly a cutaway gag not meant to be taken seriously, but the show treats it as a full reveal. Nobody in the scene says, "This is a joke, do not take it literally." It is just shown. The third version is in A Fistful of Meg. In that episode, we see Peter at the hospital the day Meg was born, filling out her birth certificate. Peter writes her name as Megatron Griffin, Megatron like the Transformers villain. Then later, off-screen, Lois changes the name to Megan, which is what everyone calls her now. Meg's full name, by this account, is Megatron. That has never been mentioned in any other episode. The fourth version is the darkest one. It comes from a season 11 episode called Ratings Guy. In a cutaway gag, Peter and Lois fondly remember the time they took baby Meg to the local fire station, not to visit, to abandon her under the old American custom of the safe haven law, which lets parents leave unwanted babies at fire stations without legal trouble. Peter and Lois are shown trying and failing to leave Meg there. The fire station refused to take her, and they had to bring her home. So, in 4 separate episodes, we have 4 separate stories of Meg's birth and early life. She was a normal baby born to Peter and Lois. She was born with a heart on her head. She was originally named Megatron. She was almost abandoned at a fire station as a newborn. And through all of this, one courtroom scene in Season 3 has already told us that Peter is not her biological father anyway. The show cannot keep track of this character, and that is before we even get to how old she is. Meg's age is another tangled mess. At the start of the show, she is 16. In early seasons, that is her established age. Then, in a Season 5 episode called Peter's Two Dads, which is the same episode where the Stan Thompson reference gets blurred out, Meg turns 17. She has a birthday party. Peter and Lois mess up the cake, getting her age wrong. She is officially 17 at the end of that episode. Then, in a Season 10 episode called Meg and Quagmire, Meg turns 18. She has a big storyline about being legally an adult. She celebrates her birthday. She is, canonically, 18 years old. But in every episode after that, Meg is still treated as a teenager living at home. She still goes to the same high school, James Woods High. She has not graduated. She is still a minor in many storylines. Her siblings' ages around her have barely budged. Chris has gone from 13 to 14 at most across the show's run. Stewie has stayed 1 year old for more than 15 seasons before the single jump to 2. The math does not work. If Meg is 18 and Chris is 14, then Chris should be older, not younger. Meg was originally 2 years older than him, but at some point the gap stretched out to 4 years, and then it closed back up. None of the kids' ages line up across the show's run. Let's go back to Stan Thompson, because he is the heart of this plot hole, and the show has given us just enough details to make it worse. Stan Thompson has been referenced in a few other episodes besides Screwed the Pooch. He is mentioned in Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, as we already covered. He is referenced in passing in a couple of other episodes as background detail. Every time, he is a name the family knows, but Meg does not. Every time, the reference is treated as canon. The show is not kidding about this. They really have decided that Peter is not Meg's biological father, and they really have decided to never do anything about it. There is only one real moment where the show seems to walk it back. In Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, Brian tells Meg she looks like Peter. This is meant to be a nice comment to make her feel better about herself. But if Meg looks like Peter, and Peter is not her biological father, then what the show is saying is that Meg coincidentally resembles the man who raised her, even though her real dad is someone else. Some fans have used this line to argue that Stan Thompson is not really her dad, and Peter is. Others say Brian was just lying to be nice. The show does not tell us which. And here is the thing that makes it a real plot hole, and not just a joke. Family Guy has resolved way bigger mysteries than this. The show killed off a main character and brought him back. The show has done hundreds of flashbacks to unpack Peter's childhood. The show has done entire episodes devoted to exploring Quagmire's past, Joe's past, even minor characters like Herbert and Mort. But the one thing the show has refused to touch across more than 20 years is the question of who Meg's father actually is. There is also a smaller related plot hole worth mentioning. In an episode called Regarding Carter, there is a throwaway line suggesting Chris was adopted. It is a single line. The show does not build on it, but it sits there in the dialogue, technically canon, waiting for someone to notice. Between that and Stan Thompson, only Stewie is confirmed to be a biological Griffin child. And even Stewie's parentage has been picked at by fans because of a weird subplot involving a man on a film set who looks and sounds exactly like him. The show has mostly shut that one down with the existence of Stewie's half-brother Bertram, who was created from Peter's donated genes. So Stewie is Peter's, probably. Chris might be adopted. Meg has a different biological dad. That means out of 3 Griffin children, only one can be confirmed on screen to actually belong to Peter. The other 2 have serious canon doubts attached to them. A family named the Griffins on a show called Family Guy may have only one actual Griffin child, and the writers have said in interviews over the years that they have no plans to ever reveal the truth about Meg. They know it is out there, they know fans talk about it, they just do not care. It is a throwaway joke that got too big, and the show has decided it is easier to ignore it than to explain it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But there is another character whose backstory is just as broken as Meg's, and whose contradictions are even more baffling. Because at least with Meg, the show forgot on purpose. With this next character, the show cannot seem to decide how old he is, even though it has shown us his driver's license. He is apparently 61 years old. He also went to high school with Peter in the 1980s. He also had a sexual encounter as a young man in 1986. You cannot do math on this character's life without the numbers snapping in half. Section 5. The Quagmire age problem, 61 years old, dating Peter's high school classmates, and a father who isn't older than him. Glenn Quagmire is Peter's next-door neighbor. He has been there since the first episode of Family Guy. He is a pilot. He is loud. He is obsessed with women. And according to the show itself, he is 61 years old. We know this because the show told us directly, on screen, in a Season 7 episode called Foxy Lady, which aired in 2009. Peter, Joe, and Quagmire are sitting together comparing their driver's licenses. Peter looks at Quagmire's license and sees something shocking. The birth date on the license makes Quagmire 61 years old. Peter is stunned. He asks how this is possible, because Quagmire does not look 61. He looks like he is in his 30s or 40s. Quagmire explains his secret. He says he keeps himself looking young by eating carrots, a lot of carrots. He grinds them into juice. He eats them raw. And he adds, with a smile, that he sometimes inserts them into his body in ways that are not appropriate to describe here. Okay, so Quagmire is 61 years old. That is now canon. The show has made it official by putting it on a physical piece of identification. Fine, here is where it falls apart. Peter Griffin is, in most episodes, around 42 or 43 years old. In some flashbacks, he is shown to have been 18 in 1984. That is when he was supposedly in high school. That flashback comes from a Season 5 episode called Meet the Quagmires, which aired in 2007. And in that episode, we see Peter in 1984 hanging out with his best friends from that era. Cleveland is there, Joe is there, and Quagmire is there too. Quagmire is shown as a young man, the same age as Peter. They are 18-year-old friends partying together in the 1980s. They go on double dates, they chase girls together. They are in the same social circle. They are contemporaries. But wait, if Quagmire is 61 years old in 2009 and he was 18 in 1984, then the math does not work. Someone who was 18 in 1984 would have been born around 1966. That person would have been 43 in 2009, not 61. So either the Meet the Quagmires flashback is wrong, or the Foxy Lady driver's license is wrong. You cannot have both. If you try to go the other way and say the driver's license is correct, then Quagmire was born around 1948, which means in 1984, when Peter was 18, Quagmire would have been 36 years old. A 36-year-old man hanging out with a group of teenage friends, going on dates, drinking with them, chasing the same girls. That is not a friendship. That is something else. The show does not explain this. It just shows us both versions and expects us not to notice. It gets even worse. In a later episode called A Fistful of Meg, which aired in season 12, we get a flashback from Quagmire's own life. In this flashback, Quagmire recounts a sexual encounter he had with a woman named Tracy Billings. The flashback is set in 1986. Quagmire in the flashback looks like a young man, late teens or early 20s. If Quagmire was really born in 1948, then in 1986 he would have been 38, a full-grown adult man, not a young guy. But the show draws him in the flashback as young. His hair is full, his face is tighter, he is clearly meant to be in his prime. So now we have three different versions of Quagmire's age. He is 61 according to his license. He was 18 in 1984. He was a young man in 1986. These are three different birth years. The show uses whichever one fits the joke it needs in a given episode. Then we get to the father problem. In a season 8 episode called Quagmire's Dad, we meet Glenn Quagmire's father for the first time. The father is a war hero, a decorated military man named Dan Quagmire. He shows up to visit his son, and the first thing you notice about Dan Quagmire is that he does not look much older than his son, Glenn. Now, fathers and sons in cartoons usually have a pretty big age gap. Peter's father, Francis, looked much older than Peter. He was gray, he was hunched, he used a cane. That is the typical way cartoons show a father who has aged into his late 70s or 80s. Dan Quagmire does not look like that. He looks like a man in his 50s or 60s, which, if Glenn is 61, would mean Dan had Glenn when he was very young, like unbelievably young, 10 or 12 years old young. That is the only way the math works if we accept the 61 age on the license. And then, in a later episode, which deals with Dan Quagmire having gender reassignment surgery and becoming Ida Davis, there is a line where Ida mentions having had the surgery at age 61. This comes after the Foxy Lady episode, where Glenn is already 61, which means at the time Ida has the surgery, Glenn's father is only as old as Glenn already is, a 61-year-old man and his 61-year-old father. The father cannot be the same age as the son. It is not biologically possible, but the show put it on screen. There is only one way to make any of this work. You have to assume the 61-year-old age is a one-time joke and not meant to be taken seriously. You have to assume Peter was looking at the license wrong, or Quagmire was lying, or the license was fake. The thing is, the show never walks it back. It never says, by the way, we were kidding. It just keeps going. In every episode after Foxy Lady, Quagmire is still treated as 61 in the background canon, but he is also still treated as Peter's contemporary in every other scene. Both are true. Neither makes sense. There is another Quagmire plot hole that has nothing to do with age. It is about his feelings for Brian. In the first 7 seasons of Family Guy, Quagmire and Brian are, at worst, neutral toward each other. They share scenes, they sit at the same bar, they are part of the same friend group. There are small flashes of tension. In a season 2 episode called The King is Dead, Quagmire gets annoyed because Brian gets cast as the lead in a local production of the musical The King and I. But that is one scene. That is not a feud. It is a small moment. Then, in a Season 8 episode called Jerome is the New Black, the show changes everything. In this episode, Brian finds out that Quagmire hates him deeply, not just dislikes him, hates him. Brian is shocked. He asks Quagmire why, and Quagmire delivers one of the most talked about monologues in the show's history. Quagmire rants for almost a full 90 seconds. He says Brian is a liar. He says Brian is a freeloader who never pays for anything. He says Brian defecates on the Griffin family's yard. He says Brian hits on Lois while living in her house as her pet. He says Brian pretends to be an intellectual to get women into bed, but really only dates bimbos. He says Brian's writing is bad. He says Brian has done nothing good in his life. He says Brian is a big, sad, alcoholic bore. It is a scene where Quagmire unloads every criticism he has ever had about Brian, all at once. The scene is well written. Seth MacFarlane is on record saying it took a lot of effort to produce. Many fans consider it one of the best scenes in the whole show because it feels like a real moment of anger from a real character. The problem is, where did this come from? For 7 full seasons, Quagmire and Brian had been fine. They were not best friends, but they were not enemies either. They had shared meals, they had been on trips together, they had done favors for each other. Nothing in the earlier seasons supports the level of hatred that pours out of Quagmire in this scene. This is a very specific kind of plot hole. It is not a mistake, it is a rewrite. The writers decided they wanted these two characters to have a long-running feud, so they rewrote their history overnight. One episode treats them as acquaintances, the next treats them as if Quagmire has been secretly burning with rage for years, and the show expects you to accept that the new version was always the truth. After Jerome is the New Black, every episode featuring Quagmire and Brian has them at each other's throats. Quagmire insults Brian. Brian tries to be polite. Quagmire insults him more. This becomes a running storyline. It gets its own episodes. It eats up plot for years. And none of it matches the friendship, or at least the peaceful coexistence, that the first 7 seasons showed. Then there is Quagmire's family history, which is also a series of contradictions. In one episode, Quagmire is said to be Polish, with a Polish birth name that was changed. In another episode, he claims he has never had sex with a Spanish woman, but he has a son in Madrid, Spain, who looks exactly like him and who was shown in a Season 4 episode called Peter's Got Woods. The Spanish son cannot exist if he has never slept with a Spanish woman. The show just shows him and moves on. Quagmire also has many children all over the world, according to various episodes. He has at least one daughter named Anna Lee, who was left at his doorstep in an episode called Quagmire's Baby. He has another daughter named Courtney, whom he almost slept with at a prom before realizing she was his child, in an episode called No Giggity, No Doubt. He has unnamed children who attend a local elementary school, mentioned in passing in a Season 9 episode called Tales of a Third Grade Nothing. For a man who has unprotected sex as often as Quagmire, this would add up over a 61-year life. But in many episodes, he acts shocked every time he learns he has another child. The show does not keep track. Every child is a surprise, even though he has been told many times that he has dozens of them. And then there is Quagmire's sister, Brenda, who was introduced very late in the show. Brenda shows up in Jerome is the New Black, when Brian mistakes her for one of Quagmire's past one-night stands. She then appears again in a Season 10 episode called Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, which is a very dark, serious episode about her being abused by her boyfriend. The problem is that Brenda does not exist in the first 7 seasons of the show. Quagmire has no sister for the first 200 episodes. Then, suddenly, she is there, and she has a whole tragic history. Nobody ever mentions why we have never seen her before. Same with Quagmire's deaf brother, Gary. He appears in 1 or 2 episodes and is never seen again. A whole deaf brother introduced and then forgotten in a character with a supposedly well-documented past. The bigger point here is that Quagmire's entire personal history has been built on the fly. Every time the writers need him to have a new relative, that relative exists. Every time they need him to be older or younger, his age shifts. Every time they need him to hate someone, he has always hated them. The character is a patchwork of contradictory details stacked on top of each other, and none of them are allowed to make each other false. You can line up the math, but the math breaks. You can count the children, but the count changes. You can try to figure out his real age, but the show has given you 3 birth years, and all 3 are official. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And yet, none of this compares to what happens with the character who holds the longest plot hole record in the entire show. A character who was introduced pregnant, stayed pregnant, and did not give birth for 7 straight years of real-world television. That is not a flashback gag. That is not a background detail. That is a pregnancy the show openly carried across more than 100 episodes before finally letting the baby come out. Section 6. Bonnie Swanson was pregnant for 7 actual years. This one is so strange that most people do not believe it at first, so let's lay it out carefully, step by step, using only what the show itself has put on screen. Bonnie Swanson is Joe Swanson's wife. She lives next door to the Griffins, on the other side from Quagmire. She first appears in a season 1 episode called A Hero Sits Next Door, which aired in May 1999. And from her very first scene, she is pregnant. She has a visible baby bump. She talks about the pregnancy. She is shown holding her belly. The show establishes, right there in her introduction, that Bonnie is expecting. The baby is coming any day now. That was 1999. Bonnie does not give birth until a season 7 episode called Ocean's 3.5, which aired in February 2009. That is 10 real-world years, over 116 episodes, 6.5 seasons of television. And in every single one of those episodes, Bonnie is still pregnant, still showing, still carrying the baby, still waiting. That is the plot hole. A pregnancy that lasted longer than most actors stay on a show. A baby that was inside its mother for a full decade before finally being born. A fetus that, by any real measure of time, should have been old enough to go to school before it ever saw the outside world. Now, here is the thing. The show knows. The show absolutely knows. This is not a mistake that slipped past the writers. They openly joked about it for years. In a season 4 episode called Blind Ambition, Peter makes a direct reference to how long Bonnie has been pregnant. He says something like, "Has she not had that baby yet?" The line is designed to make the audience laugh. The writers are winking at the viewer. They are saying, "Yes, we know. We know it has been 6 years. We are not going to do anything about it." And that is exactly what they do. They do nothing about it. Bonnie stays pregnant. Episodes come and go. Everyone around her has storylines. Everyone else's lives move forward. Quagmire chases women. Peter gets into trouble. Brian writes bad novels. Stewie builds weapons. Lois gets jobs and quits them. And in the middle of all of this, Bonnie just stands around with a baby bump, waiting. Eventually, when Ocean's 3.5 finally comes around, the show plays the birth as a huge event. Joe is terrified. Peter tries to help in his usual stupid ways, and the baby, a girl named Susie Swanson, is finally born. But even the birth itself has a plot hole buried inside it, because in a season 3 episode called Lethal Weapons, there is a scene where Peter is arguing with Bonnie. During the argument, the baby inside Bonnie kicks Peter through her stomach. It is a cutaway gag, yes, but it is also a confirmation that there is a real, living, developing baby inside her. A baby with enough strength to kick a grown man. a baby that is present, a baby that has been developing. If that baby was already strong enough to kick Peter in 2001 and she was not born until 2009, then Susie Swanson spent at least 8 years inside her mother's uterus after she was already fully formed enough to kick. That is not a pregnancy. That is a hostage situation. You can argue, correctly, that this is what happens when a cartoon runs on what is called a floating timeline. A floating timeline is the thing most long-running animated shows do. The characters do not age in real time with the audience. The Simpsons does this, SpongeBob does this, South Park does this, Family Guy does this too. Time in the world of the show is a soft thing. Years pass in the real world, but only days or weeks pass inside the show. Meg stays 17, Chris stays 14, Stewie stays 1. The cast is frozen. That is fine in theory. The audience understands. We are not supposed to do the math. But pregnancy is the one thing that breaks the floating timeline, because pregnancy is, by definition, a timer. A pregnancy is 9 months. That is how biology works. When a character is pregnant, the show has put a clock on itself. You cannot freeze a pregnancy for 10 years and expect the audience to just accept it. You either have to give birth within a reasonable number of episodes, or you have to acknowledge that something is very wrong. Family Guy chose option 3. It chose to keep Bonnie pregnant, keep the clock ticking, keep everyone aware of the pregnancy, and keep refusing to end it for 10 years. The show let this one joke stretch to a length no other joke in the show's history has ever reached. And the weirdest part is that once Susie is born, the show treats it like it was no big deal. Bonnie loses the baby weight almost instantly. She is back to her normal shape within the same episode. The pregnancy, which had defined her character for half the show's run, is suddenly just over. No comment, no reflection, no attempt to explain what happened to those 10 years. Then comes the next plot hole that stacks on top of it. Once Susie is born, the show introduces a strange detail. Susie, like Stewie, is revealed to be secretly intelligent. She cannot speak out loud yet. She only makes baby noises, but inside her head, she has the voice of the actor Patrick Stewart. She thinks in full sentences. She understands everything happening around her. This is a fun gag. It is clearly a parody of the Stewie joke. But it raises a new question. If Susie spent 10 years developing inside Bonnie, and she came out with the mental sharpness of a grown man, was she actually in there thinking for all that time? Was Patrick Stewart's voice trapped inside Bonnie's belly for a decade, waiting to be born? The show does not say. The show does not care. And we also have to deal with the other problem the pregnancy created, Bonnie's first child, Kevin Swanson. Kevin was introduced in A Hero Sits Next Door. He is Bonnie's son. He was a teenager when we first met him. He was old enough to have had a crush on Meg Griffin. So when Bonnie appears pregnant in that first episode, she is pregnant with her second child. She already has Kevin. Now, during the 10 years of her pregnancy, Kevin goes through a lot of story. He ages up. He joins the army. He gets shipped off to the Iraq War. He goes missing in action. He is presumed dead. The show kills him off in the background with a casual line of dialogue in a later episode. His mother is still pregnant with his little sister during all of this. So Bonnie is not just carrying a baby for 10 years. She is also grieving a son who was sent to war and reported killed, all while still pregnant. Her emotional state during this decade should be unimaginable. A pregnancy that never ends, a son who died overseas, a husband who is paralyzed from the waist down. It is one of the most tragic setups in any cartoon, but the show does not play any of it as tragedy. She is just there, pregnant, waiting, smiling when the joke requires it. Let's look at some of the specific episodes where her pregnancy is visible, because it helps show how consistent this plot hole is across the show's run. In A Hero Sits Next Door, Season 1, she is pregnant, visibly. In Death Lives, Season 2, she is pregnant. In Lethal Weapons, Season 3, she is pregnant, and the baby kicks Peter. In Let's Go to the Hop, Season 2, she is pregnant in the background. In Love Thy Trophy, Season 2, she is pregnant. In Forefather, Season 2, pregnant. Across a dozen more Season 4 and 5 episodes, pregnant. By the time Blind Ambition comes around in Season 4, Peter is making jokes about her having been pregnant for years. The show is self-aware. It knows what it is doing. Then, in Season 6, Season 7, Season 8, Season 9, she is still pregnant. It becomes background noise. It becomes the thing viewers stopped paying attention to. Nobody expected her to ever give birth. She was just always pregnant, like Quagmire was always horny, or Peter was always stupid, or Brian was always drunk. Pregnant Bonnie was just part of the furniture of the show. And then, finally, in Ocean's 3.5, they let her have the baby. Peter tries to induce labor by giving her a weird medicine. Whether that actually worked or whether it was a coincidence is not clear. She goes into labor, she goes to the hospital, Susie is born. Joe cannot afford the medical bill, which leads to a whole storyline about a loan shark. The birth itself is almost a side plot inside the episode. Now, here is the part of the plot hole that actually matters for the show's canon, because we need to ask, how many years did pass in the world of the show during this pregnancy? The floating timeline usually says very little time passes. Stewie stays 1, Meg stays a teenager, Chris does not really age, Peter turns 42 or 43, depending on the episode. So, in theory, the whole show takes place over maybe 2 or 3 years of in-universe time. But Bonnie's pregnancy directly contradicts this, because you cannot have a pregnancy last 2 or 3 in-universe years either. That is still 3 times longer than a normal pregnancy. 2 years of pregnancy is still a biological impossibility. The show has, through Bonnie, broken its own timeline rules. Either time passes much faster than we think, and Stewie should be much older than 1, or time is running normally, and Bonnie is medically defying all biology. It gets worse when you factor in Kevin. Kevin joined the army. Kevin went to Iraq. Kevin was killed. Kevin came back. All of those things happened between Bonnie getting pregnant and Bonnie giving birth. That is years of story. That is a boy becoming a man, getting deployed overseas, fighting in a war, being declared dead, and then returning home alive years later. That cannot happen in 2 or 3 years. That needs a decade or more. But the Griffin kids living next door did not age at all during that same period. So the pregnancy actually proves 2 contradictory things at the same time. It proves that time is passing, because Kevin's story requires a lot of it, and it proves that time is not passing, because no other character is visibly aging around her. Bonnie is standing inside a time bubble. Years pass outside her. Minutes pass inside her. And her pregnancy is tied to both clocks at once. This is the biggest structural plot hole in the whole show, not the biggest character plot hole, not the biggest story plot hole. The biggest structural one, because it shows that Family Guy cannot keep its own sense of time straight. A pregnancy is the simplest possible way to measure time in a story. If a character is pregnant, we know roughly how many months have passed. If the pregnancy lasts 3 seasons, we know 3 seasons equal 9 months. If the pregnancy lasts 10 years, we know the show has no idea what time means anymore. And here is the nail in the coffin. After Susie is born, Bonnie has more children implied across later episodes, references to other kids, never seen, just mentioned. The show does not even bother to keep the Swanson family count steady. We have Kevin, we have Susie, and we have occasional hints of more, but only Kevin and Susie ever appear regularly. The rest are just ghosts in the dialogue. The pregnancy is the worst, but it is part of a bigger pattern. The show cannot keep time straight. Characters age when the story needs them to. Characters freeze when the joke needs them to. Years pass in some scenes, and days pass in others. And this becomes an actual problem, not just a joke, when it comes to Bonnie's first son, the one we mentioned earlier. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because Kevin Swanson is not just a plot hole about time. Kevin Swanson is a plot hole about death. The show killed him, officially, casually, in one line of dialogue. Joe Swanson mentioned in passing that his son had died in Iraq. It was a throwaway reference. Everyone moved on. And then, 2 full seasons later, Kevin walked through the front door of the Griffin's house, very much alive, and tried to explain away his own death with a story that did not make any sense. And the episode itself ended with a second Kevin showing up at the door and Peter telling the audience there was no time to figure out which one was real. Section 7. Kevin Swanson died in Iraq and then came back alive twice. Kevin Swanson is Joe and Bonnie's son. He first showed up in the very first Swanson episode, A Hero Sits Next Door, all the way back in season 1. He was a teenager. He was friendly. He was, for a little while, kind of a love interest for Meg Griffin. He helped her with her homework. He walked her to school. He was the only boy in the neighborhood who treated her with basic respect. For the first few seasons of the show, Kevin was a regular part of the Swanson family on screen. Then, the show quietly wrote him off. In a season 4 episode called Patriot Games, Kevin is briefly shown. After that, he fades from the show. The writers, in hindsight, have said they ran out of ideas for him. He had served his purpose as Meg's unspoken crush and as a Swanson family member. They needed a way to get him off the show without making a big deal of it. So, they sent him to war. In a later episode, Kevin is said to have been accepted into the military. He is shipped off to the Iraq War. He bids everyone farewell. The Swanson family is sad, but proud. Kevin is now gone, serving overseas. For a while, that is the end of it. He is a background character, mentioned here and there. In a season 5 episode called Love, Blactually, Bonnie mentions getting a Mother's Day letter from Kevin while he is deployed. Fine. That is normal. He is alive. He is serving. He is just not on the show right now. Then comes Steroids, a season 7 episode. It aired in May 2009. And in the middle of this episode, buried in a side scene, Joe casually mentions that Kevin is dead, killed in Iraq. That is it. That is the whole reveal. No special episode, no funeral, no grief arc, no emotional weight. Just one throwaway line, in passing, in the background of a different storyline. Joe's son, who was introduced as a recurring character in season 1, who was important to Meg, who was a full member of the Swanson family, is now dead. And the show spent 0 episodes on it. It is the single most casual death of a returning character in cartoon television history. Fans noticed. They did not like it. Kevin had been with the show for years. He deserved more than a background mention. But the show did not care. The writers had moved on. Kevin was off the board. Then comes Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is a season 10 episode. It aired in November 2011. That is 2 full seasons after Kevin's death was announced. In this episode, the Griffins are hosting a big Thanksgiving dinner. Everyone is there. Joe and Bonnie have come over. The food is on the table. Everyone is sitting down. There's a knock at the door. Peter opens it. Kevin Swanson is standing there, alive. Joe and Bonnie are shocked. They cannot believe what they are seeing. They run to hug him. They cry. They ask how this is possible. The army told them Kevin was dead. They were told there was a body. They had accepted the loss, and here he is, on their doorstep, breathing. Kevin tells them a story. He says he was in a coma for 5 years in a hospital in Kuwait. That is why nobody could find him. That is why the paperwork said he was killed. It was all a mix-up. He is alive. He is fine. He is home. Except, as the episode goes on, Kevin's story does not add up. He mentions details that do not match. He talks about events that happened during the years he was supposed to be in a coma. The family starts to notice something is off. Eventually, Kevin breaks down and tells the truth. He was not in a coma. He faked his death. He went AWOL, which is a military term for abandoning your post without permission. He did it because he could not stand what the United States was doing in Iraq. He had befriended local Iraqi civilians. He watched innocent people die. He watched his fellow soldiers die. He decided the war was wrong, so he staged his own death, walked off, and spent years hiding. Eventually, he made his way back to Rhode Island. Now, this is, honestly, a strong storyline. It is genuinely serious. The show handles Kevin's anti-war argument with more weight than it usually gives to anything. Brian defends him. Other characters disagree. There is a real debate. It is one of the more grown-up scenes Family Guy has ever done. Joe is furious. Going AWOL is a serious crime. Joe is a cop. He arrests his own son. He handcuffs Kevin and prepares to take him to jail. Then Kevin reminds Joe of a moment from Joe's past, when Joe let a small crime slide because he felt sympathy for the person committing it. Joe softens. He lets Kevin go. Father and son make up. The episode is almost over, and then the show drops the biggest joke of the whole story on its audience. There is another knock at the door. Peter opens it. A second Kevin Swanson is standing there. A different actor, a different voice, a different look. This Kevin points at the Kevin we just spent the whole episode with and says, "Wait, that man is an imposter. I am the real Kevin Swanson." Everyone stares. Peter turns to the camera. He tells the audience they do not have time to figure this out, and the episode just ends. Roll credits. That is not a made-up description. That is exactly how the episode ends. With two different Kevins standing in the same room, both claiming to be real, and Peter telling us we are not going to get an answer. The show never resolves it. Not in the next episode, not in the next season, not ever. We do not find out which Kevin is real. We do not find out what happened to the fake one. We do not find out what the two Kevins have been doing since the episode ended. The Kevin who appears in later episodes is drawn and voiced like the first one, the one we spent the whole Thanksgiving episode with, but there is no on-screen confirmation that he is the real one. Just a quiet choice by the writers to pretend the second Kevin never showed up. That is the plot hole laid bare. Kevin Swanson was alive in early seasons. He was reported dead, officially, on screen, in a casual line. He came back alive 2 seasons later with a fake coma story. He admitted he faked his own death. His father arrested him and then let him go. And then a second version of him showed up at the door, and the show just walked away from the question. Let's talk about why this works as a plot hole and not just as a joke. Family Guy does lots of absurd things in its endings. Cutaways end strangely all the time. Episodes often wrap up with a weird cliffhanger that nobody mentions again. That is part of the show's style. But Kevin Swanson is different. He is a recurring character. He has a family. He keeps appearing in later episodes. The show continues to use him, so the audience is told, silently, that the version of Kevin we see after Thanksgiving is the real one. But the episode itself never tells us that. The show is asking you to just accept that the second Kevin does not count without ever explaining why. And the problem gets bigger when you look at Kevin's behavior in episodes that come after Thanksgiving. In Season 10, in an episode called Tom Tucker, The Man and His Dream, Bonnie mentions that Kevin recently tried to kill himself by drinking 2 bottles of dish soap. He is at home now after the AWOL reveal, living with his parents. He is deeply depressed. He is showing signs of what real veterans experience after combat. The show is giving Kevin a post-war depression storyline. This is treated as real. Kevin has PTSD. He suffers nightmares. He cannot sleep. In a season 11 episode called Internal Affairs, Chris mentions that Kevin spends all day at the local bus stop but never actually boards a bus. He has become a ghost, wandering the edges of the show, unable to rejoin normal life. This is actually some of the most serious, thoughtful writing Family Guy has ever done. A veteran coming home and being unable to reintegrate into civilian life is a real story that affects many families. The show, for once, is treating it with weight. Except, the weight is hollow because Kevin did not really go through a war. Kevin faked his death. He spent years hiding, not fighting. So his PTSD is not from combat. It is from what, exactly? Guilt? Fear? Running? The show acts like Kevin is a traumatized soldier when, by his own confession, he spent years avoiding being a soldier. These two stories do not match. He either experienced the horrors of war, and that is why he is depressed, or he ran away before those horrors happened, and his depression has a different source. The show wants both, a tragic, traumatized veteran for the emotional scenes, and a runaway deserter for the political argument. You cannot have both at the same time. And let's go back to the second Kevin for a second, because that moment at the end of Thanksgiving is actually one of the sneakiest plot holes the show ever planted. Most viewers laughed and forgot, but the moment is canon. It happened. A second Kevin, clearly different from the first, appeared on screen and accused the first of being an imposter. If the writers had wanted to make it clear the second Kevin was a joke, they could have had him melt into a pile of goo, or be revealed as a mask, or be some obvious gag. They did not. They played it straight. A serious-looking man said, "That is not the real Kevin." Some fans have tried to work out which Kevin is the real one. The first Kevin, the one we saw all episode, is the one the show used going forward. The second, Kevin vanished. The most likely explanation is that the second Kevin was the real soldier, the one who stayed in Iraq, the one whose identity got confused after his unit was destroyed, and the first Kevin was an imposter who took his identity. But the show never confirmed any of that. It is just a theory. The canon answer is simply, there are two Kevins. The show does not care which is real. Move on. There is also a broader plot hole around the Swanson family that Kevin's return just adds to. Joe Swanson is a police officer. Joe is paralyzed from the waist down. In later seasons, Joe becomes paralyzed from the neck down in an episode called Brokeback Swanson. Bonnie leaves him during that episode. She goes to Europe, but then in the next episode she is back with no real explanation. Joe is back in his usual wheelchair, not fully paralyzed anymore, with no mention of how he recovered. The whole storyline is dropped. This matters for Kevin because Kevin's home life, the one the show uses to write his post-war depression scenes, only makes sense if Joe and Bonnie are still married and normal. But Joe and Bonnie's marriage has been shown to collapse multiple times, then silently reset across different seasons. Kevin is supposedly living in a stable home while he recovers. In reality, the house he is living in has been destroyed and rebuilt, its parents have split up and reunited, and its baby sister has aged from newborn to 5-year-old to toddler again, depending on the episode. And one more thing about Kevin that people tend to miss. Early Kevin, the one who hung out with Meg, was voiced by a different person. Later, Kevin, the one who came back alive in Thanksgiving, is voiced by the actor Scott Grimes, who also plays a character on Seth MacFarlane's other show, American Dad. Scott Grimes voices Kevin from Thanksgiving onward. The voice is completely different from the earlier Kevin. The two voices do not sound related. It is almost as if the show is quietly admitting, in its casting, that this is not the same character. But on screen, the show says, "This is Kevin. Do not ask questions." What does all of this add up to? It adds up to a character who died, came back alive, admitted he faked his death, got arrested, got released, developed trauma that did not match his actual experiences, was replaced by a second version of himself that the show never explained, and continued to appear in later seasons as if none of that was a problem. Kevin Swanson is the cleanest example of how Family Guy handles character death, which is to say, not well. The show kills people when it needs a quick laugh or a dramatic moment. Then it brings them back whenever it wants, and it never explains the gap between the two. This has happened with other characters too, in smaller ways. Mayor Adam West was killed and then kept appearing. Diane Simmons was murdered on screen, which was a big moment, but other characters who died have simply walked back in with no mention of their death. But Kevin is the biggest, because his death was casual, his return was ridiculous, and his second self is just left hanging at the end of an episode like a forgotten umbrella. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Family Guy does not know how to let a character stay dead. And if you thought Kevin's death and return was a mess, you have not heard about the main cast member who died, got replaced by a whole new dog with a full backstory of his own, and then came back to life through time travel, erasing the replacement from existence. That dog showed up again anyway in a later episode, with no explanation for how a character from a deleted timeline could still be walking around in the current one. Section 8. Brian died, and the show built an entire Vinny subplot around it before undoing everything. This is the big one. The Brian death arc is the most famous plot hole in Family Guy history. It is also the cleanest example of the show breaking its own rules on purpose, in full view of the audience, and never quite putting the pieces back together. Let's go through it slowly, because the details matter. The episode is called Life of Brian. It is the 6th episode of Season 12. It aired in November 2013. The title is a play on an old Monty Python movie, but the plot has nothing to do with comedy. It is a death episode. Here is what happens. Brian and Stewie have just returned from a time travel adventure. Stewie decides, after nearly dying one too many times on these adventures, that he is going to destroy his time machine forever. He takes the machine apart. He smashes it. He throws away the pieces. He is done with time travel. No more. A short time later, Brian and Stewie go outside to set up a street hockey net. Brian is on the street putting the net together. A car comes around the corner. It does not stop. It hits Brian directly. The driver speeds off. The hit and run is clean. Brian is lying in the road, badly injured. Stewie screams for help. The family rushes Brian to the vet. The surgery does not go well. The vet comes out with bad news. There is nothing more they can do. Brian is dying. The whole Griffin family gathers around him in his final moments. Brian, barely conscious, tells them he loves them all. He thanks them for being his family. And then he dies. Right there, on screen. No joke, no cutaway, no reversal. That is the scene that millions of fans watched in November 2013. It was played completely straight. The music was somber, the animation was slower, the voices were quiet. There was not a single gag in the final minutes of the episode. For once, Family Guy was being serious. Brian was dead. The show had killed one of its most important characters. The fan reaction was massive. Petitions were started. Thousands of people signed them, demanding Brian be brought back. Social media exploded. Fans were furious. Some fans even threatened to stop watching the show forever. But the writers had a plan. Before we get to that plan, let's talk about what happened in the episodes right after Brian's death, because those episodes are where the plot holes really start to stack up. A month later, in the show's timeline, the Griffins are still grieving. Lois decides the family needs to move forward. They need a new dog. Peter takes them to a pet shop, and at the pet shop they find a smooth-talking Italian-American dog named Vinny. Vinny is voiced by Tony Sirico, a real actor famous for playing a tough guy on the show The Sopranos. Vinny is a whole character. He has his own personality, his own backstory, his own voice. He mentions his old owner, a man named Leo, who died. He talks about how he knows what it feels like to lose someone. He bonds with Stewie, who is still grieving Brian. By the end of the episode, Vinny has joined the Griffin family. The last shot of Life of Brian is Vinny sleeping on the floor next to Stewie's bed, in the exact spot Brian used to sleep. Now, here is where it becomes a plot hole, and not just a shocking storyline. The next episode aired the following week. It is called Into Harmony's Way. It is a full season 12 episode. Vinny is in it. He is treated as a regular member of the Griffin family. The opening credits have been updated. Vinny is now in the opening sequence in place of Brian. He does Brian's actions. He sits where Brian sat. He is, officially, the new family dog. The episode has its own plot. Peter becomes a singer. Nothing about the episode is about Brian. It is a normal Family Guy episode, except the dog is different. Vinny is part of the family. Everyone is fine with him. Brian is not mentioned once, not a single line, not even a passing reference. It is as if Brian had never existed. Now, hold that thought, because what the show is telling us in Into Harmony's Way is that Brian is really gone. The family has moved on. Vinny is here now. This is the new normal. Roll credits. 2 episodes later, the show aired Christmas Guy. It is the 8th episode of season 12. It aired in December 2013. It is a Christmas special. In the episode, Stewie is at the Quahog Mall. He sees a future version of himself who has come back in time to buy toys before they sell out. This future Stewie has a working time machine with him. He has the exact machine that present-day Stewie had destroyed a few episodes earlier. Present-day Stewie realizes something. He sneaks up on the future version of himself. He steals the time machine, and he uses it to travel back to the day Brian was killed. He arrives at the street hockey scene. He sees past Brian about to be hit by the car. He pushes past Brian out of the way. The car misses. Brian survives. Present Stewie, from the future, starts to fade away, because by saving Brian, he has changed the timeline. His past self will now grow up in a world where Brian lives. The future Stewie, who did not save Brian, will never exist. Brian, before fading, Stewie vanishes, turns to him, and thanks him. Back in present day, Brian is alive. The Christmas carnival is happening. The family is together. Brian is sitting at the dinner table. It is as if Life of Brian never happened. The episode ends with Stewie and Brian sharing a moment. Brian thanks Stewie for saving his life. Stewie has no memory of any of it, because it was a future version of himself who made the change. But Brian knows, and he is grateful. Vinny is gone. He is erased from the timeline. He is never mentioned again in the episode. Seth MacFarlane, the creator of the show, later said that killing Brian was a gag the entire time. He tweeted that people would have to be insane to think the show would really kill off its most important character permanently. The whole arc was a 3-episode prank on the audience. Brian was never really gone. Now, here is the problem. A very large problem. If Stewie travels back in time and saves Brian, and that erases Vinny from existence, then the episode Into Harmony's Way should not exist anymore either, because that episode takes place in a timeline where Brian is dead and Vinny is the family dog. In the new timeline, where Brian lives and Vinny was never adopted, the events of Into Harmony's Way cannot have happened. So what is Into Harmony's Way now? Is it canon? Is it erased? Did it ever happen? The show does not tell us. Into Harmony's Way has never been officially retconned. It has never been removed from the show. It still exists on the list of Family Guy episodes. Fans can still watch it. If you look at the episode numbers, it is still the 217th episode of the series. It is still part of the show's history. But within the show's own canon, it cannot have happened because Brian is not in it and Brian is alive. That means an entire canonical episode of Family Guy, an episode that aired on television with a real plot and real events, is now floating in limbo. It happened and also did not happen. The show refuses to pick. That is the first plot hole in the Brian death arc. The second plot hole is even bigger, and it comes from an episode that aired a couple of seasons later. The episode is called The Boys in the Band, the 15th episode of season 15. It aired in 2017. In that episode, Stewie's childhood friend Olivia returns. She is putting together a band of children to perform music. She needs Stewie, Brian, and some other members. At one point, she replaces Brian with another musician. That replacement musician is Vinny. Vinny, the Italian-American dog, the dog who was adopted after Brian died and then erased from existence when Brian was saved. Vinny is in the episode. He has dialogue. He is drawn the same way he was drawn in season 12. He is voiced the same way. He is Vinny, the exact same Vinny. How is this possible? If Stewie erased Vinny from the timeline by saving Brian in Christmas Guy, then Vinny should not exist in the current canon. He was never adopted because Brian was never dead. He was never part of the Griffin family. He should have remained in the pet shop, never entering the Griffins' lives. But here he is in a season 15 episode, 3 years after being erased, showing up to fill in for Brian in a band. The show does not explain this. Nobody in the episode says, "Oh wait, how do we know Vinny if we never adopted him?" Nobody says, "Vinny, what are you doing here? You are supposed to not exist." The episode just uses him as a background character, like he was always there. There are only 2 ways to explain it. Either the time travel eraser in Christmas Guy did not fully work, and Vinny still exists as a separate dog who just happens to not live with the Griffins anymore, or the show forgot that Vinny was erased and brought him back anyway, because the writers thought the gag was funny. Both explanations are bad. The first requires us to believe that Stewie's time travel is partial, meaning Brian lives and Vinny also still exists, but in a different house, and the 2 dogs have simply never crossed paths until now. The second requires us to accept that the show does not remember its own rules. Either way, Vinny should not be in that episode, but he is. There's a deeper problem here too. When Seth MacFarlane admitted that Brian's death was a gag all along, he broke the trust that long-running shows rely on. Because if the show's writers are willing to kill a main character and then undo it with time travel, then nothing that happens in Family Guy matters. Every death is fake. Every consequence can be reversed. Every storyline can be walked back. The show has no stakes. It never did. And yet, between Life of Brian and Christmas Guy, the show genuinely tried to make fans believe Brian was gone for good. Into Harmony's Way was a real episode with a real plot, treated as a new status quo. If the writers had always planned to bring Brian back, then Into Harmony's Way was an elaborate lie to the audience, a whole episode of television existing only to trick viewers into thinking Vinny was the new dog. Let's also talk about what happens to Brian after he comes back, because this is its own mini plot hole. In Christmas Guy, when Brian is brought back to life, he has memories of the entire experience. He thanks future Stewie for saving him. He knows, in some way, that he was dead and came back. But in every episode after that, Brian acts like nothing happened. He does not talk about the experience of dying. He does not mention Vinny. He does not reflect on the fact that he was hit by a car and killed. He just goes back to being regular Brian. The trauma of his own death, which was played so seriously in Life of Brian, has simply been erased from his personality. This makes sense if you think of the arc as just a joke. Of course, regular Brian does not remember being dead, because the show needs him to be regular Brian in every episode. But if you treat the canon seriously, which is what a plot hole analysis requires, Brian should be a deeply changed character after Christmas Guy. He literally died. He was literally brought back through time travel. He should have a different outlook on life. He should be grateful. He should be afraid of cars. He should at least mention it once. He never does. There is one more tiny thing. In the episode right after Christmas Guy, which is called Vestigial Peter, Brian is completely normal. There is no acknowledgement of the fact that he was dead for the past 2 episodes. The family is acting like Life of Brian and Into Harmony's Way never happened. Stewie has no memory of saving Brian, because it was future Stewie who did it. Present Stewie just woke up one day and Brian was alive. From his point of view, the death never happened at all. So half the characters in the house remember a version of events where Brian died, Vinny was adopted, and then Brian came back through time travel. The other half of the house remembers a version where none of that happened and Brian was alive the whole time. And the show does not clarify which memory is real. It just moves on. This is the deepest plot hole in Family Guy. A character who died got replaced by a full new cast member with his own history, got brought back by time travel, and whose replacement then mysteriously reappeared 3 seasons later. And the show asks you to accept all of it without asking questions. The most honest thing about the whole arc is that the writers themselves have admitted it was a trick. They knew they were going to bring him back. They did it anyway. They counted on fans forgetting the details. Most fans did. But if you were falling asleep to this and you were listening closely, you can hear all the cracks in the story. Brian is alive. Brian was dead. Vinny is erased. Vinny is in season 15. Into Harmony's Way happened, but also cannot have happened. All of these things are true at the same time, because Family Guy does not need them to be consistent. It just needs them to be funny. And that same loose relationship with its own history is what caused the single most embarrassing plot hole the show has ever produced. Because when Family Guy finally got to cross over with its oldest rival, a show called The Simpsons, the writers made the episode about the 2 families meeting for the first time. They built the whole story around that premise. They promoted it that way. They gave it a feature-length runtime. They treated it as a historic event. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The only problem was that the 2 families had already met more than once years before, and everyone who watched both shows knew it. Section 9. The Simpsons crossover that everyone forgot they had already done. In September 2014, Family Guy aired what was supposed to be the biggest episode of its entire run, a crossover with The Simpsons. The 2 most famous adult cartoons in American history, together for the first time ever, in a single feature-length episode. The episode is called The Simpsons Guy. It is the first episode of season 13. It runs for about 44 minutes, which is roughly twice the length of a normal Family Guy episode. It was heavily promoted for months before it aired. The writers talked about it in interviews. Fox ran trailers for it. Both the Family Guy and Simpsons fan bases waited for it with excitement. A long-time rivalry between the 2 shows, with Family Guy often accused of copying Simpsons jokes, would finally be put on screen. The whole story is built on one idea. The Griffins and the Simpsons have never met. They live in different towns. They exist in different cartoon universes. When the 2 families finally run into each other, it is the first contact between their worlds. They do not know each other. They have to introduce themselves. They have to get to know one another from scratch. The plot goes like this. The Griffins leave Quahog after getting into some trouble. They drive to a town called Springfield, which is where the Simpsons live. When they arrive, they run into Bart Simpson first. Bart and Stewie become instant friends. Then the Griffins meet the rest of the Simpson family: Homer, Marge, Lisa, Maggie, the whole gang. Peter and Homer become friends. They eat donuts together. They drink beer together. They have a big argument over whether Pawtucket Patriot beer, which Peter drinks, is a ripoff of Duff beer, which Homer drinks. This argument leads to a huge lawsuit. The lawsuit leads to a long courtroom scene, and the episode builds to a massive fight between Peter and Homer, with the two cartoon fathers beating each other up across the town. The whole thing only works if these are two families who have never been part of each other's stories before. The entire premise rests on the idea that this is a historic meeting, that these two worlds have been separate, that the audience is finally watching something new. Here is the problem. The two families had already met, more than once, and both shows had shown it. Let's go through the evidence. The first meeting happened in a Simpsons episode called Treehouse of Horror 13. This is the 13th Halloween special from The Simpsons. It aired in November 2002, which is 12 years before The Simpsons guy. 12 years. In one of the segments of that Halloween special, Homer Simpson creates a bunch of clones of himself. These clones fill the whole town. They cause chaos, and in one short shot during the chaos, the camera pans across the field of Homer clones, and you can see, among them, Peter Griffin. The shot is quick, but it is definite. Peter Griffin is there, visually, on screen, in an official Simpsons episode, inside Homer's world, mixed in with Homer clones. That is not a fan theory. That is on the DVD. That is in the episode. Peter Griffin and Homer Simpson were in the same scene, in the same town, 12 years before. The Simpsons guy pretended they had never met. The second meeting came in another Simpsons episode called The Italian Bob. This aired in December 2005, 9 years before The Simpsons guy. In this episode, the Simpsons travel to Italy. While they are there, at one point, they look at a book of criminal mugshots. The book is filled with cartoon characters wanted for crimes. Among the mugshots is Peter Griffin. His face is there, clearly visible, listed as a criminal. Right next to him is Stan Smith from American Dad, another Seth MacFarlane show. The joke in the scene is that Peter is wanted for, in the show's words, plagiarism. Stan is wanted for plagiarism of plagiarism. The joke is clearly about Family Guy being accused of copying The Simpsons, and American Dad being accused of copying Family Guy. So, in 2005, The Simpsons officially put Peter Griffin on screen, in their world, as a criminal in Italy, 9 years before the crossover that treated the two families as strangers. The third meeting happened the other way around, on Family Guy itself. In a Family Guy episode called Cool Hand Peter, which aired in Season 6 in 2008, this is 6 years before The Simpsons guy. In the episode, Peter and his friends are put on trial. The courtroom is filled with a jury made up of cartoon characters, and among the members of that jury, sitting there listening to the case, is Homer Simpson. That is not a background cameo. That is a speaking appearance. Homer Simpson is drawn in the Family Guy style, sitting in the jury box in a Family Guy episode. He is part of the story. He is one of the 12 jurors deciding Peter's fate. So in 2008, Homer Simpson was officially in Family Guy, 6 years before. The Simpsons guy would pretend the two men had never met. Let's also look at a fourth piece of evidence. There is a Family Guy episode from Season 10 called Ratings Guy. In this episode, Peter messes with television ratings. At one point, Homer Simpson shows up at the Griffin house and says he has done similar things to shows in his world. Peter and Homer have a conversation. Two characters from two shows talking to each other, sharing their lives, in 2012, 2 years before The Simpsons guy. These are not fan theories or deleted scenes. These are real moments from real aired episodes. All 4 are documented. All 4 show the Griffins and the Simpsons having already interacted. And yet, the Simpsons guy treats all of this like it never happened. When the Griffins arrive in Springfield, they do not recognize anyone. They have never heard of the Simpsons. The Simpsons have never heard of them. They introduce themselves like strangers. The whole 44-minute episode is built on this false premise. There is no mention of Treehouse of Horror 13. There is no mention of the Italian Bob. There is no mention of Cool Hand Peter. There is no mention of Ratings Guy. All 4 of those earlier interactions are treated as if they never existed. This is the plot hole. The 2 shows spent over a decade casually acknowledging each other, putting characters in each other's episodes, having them share scenes, joke about each other, reference each other. And then, when the actual big crossover arrived, all of that history was quietly erased so the episode could pretend it was the first time. Now, the writers probably thought the audience would not notice. Most viewers of The Simpsons Guy had not watched every episode of both shows. Most did not remember Peter Griffin appearing in an Italian mugshot book in 2005. Most did not notice Homer Simpson on Peter's jury in 2008. The writers were counting on the audience to just accept the new premise. But the plot hole is still there. It is baked into the episode. The Simpsons Guy contradicts at least 4 earlier pieces of canon from both shows. That is not a mistake. That is a choice. The writers decided that the dramatic weight of pretending the 2 families had never met was more important than respecting the history they had already built. This is part of a bigger pattern in Family Guy, where the show treats crossovers with other cartoons in inconsistent ways. Let's look at The Cleveland Show, because this is where it really starts getting strange. The Cleveland Show was a spin-off from Family Guy. It started in 2009. The main character, Cleveland Brown, was originally one of Peter's best friends. He had lived next door to the Griffins for the first 7 seasons of Family Guy. In a 2009 episode called Baby Not on Board, Cleveland mentions to Quagmire that he is about to get his own spin-off show. That is an open admission from one cartoon character to another that they live in a world where they know they are on television. It is a meta joke, but the show keeps going with it. Then, Cleveland moves to a town called Stool Bend, Virginia, for The Cleveland Show. The Simpsons, American Dad, and Family Guy have all had episodes where their characters travel between shows. There is a famous episode called Spies Reminiscent of Us, which is a Family Guy episode, where Brian and Stewie accidentally redirect a missile. The missile flies across several states and crashes into Cleveland's new house in Stool Bend. Cleveland falls out of his bathtub. It is the same running gag from Family Guy happening in a Cleveland Show setting inside a Family Guy episode. This proves that Family Guy and The Cleveland Show take place in the same universe. They are in the same reality. The characters can reach each other geographically. Then, there is American Dad, another Seth MacFarlane show. In the 3-way crossover episode called Hurricane from 2013, Peter Griffin, Cleveland Brown, and Stan Smith from American Dad all appear together at the end of the episode. Their 3 houses end up in the same neighborhood after a storm. They face off against each other. 3 worlds, 1 scene, 1 ending. So, according to the show's own canon, all 4 Seth MacFarlane cartoons exist in the same world. Family Guy, The Cleveland Show, American Dad, and the spin-offs are all connected. The characters know each other, they can travel between their towns, they can meet up. But The Simpsons is not a Seth MacFarlane show. The Simpsons is made by a completely different creative team. Yet the 2 shows have been referencing each other for decades, with characters appearing in both. And when the big crossover happened, the show decided to pretend none of that history existed. This is the plot hole that matters. Family Guy has no consistent rule about which other cartoons are in its world. The Cleveland Show and American Dad are in, that is, canon. The Simpsons might be in, based on the 4 earlier crossovers, but then the Simpsons guy said, no, they are not in, they are separate, we have never met before. The canon is broken. And it gets worse when you look at smaller cartoon references in Family Guy over the years. Characters from the Flintstones have appeared in Family Guy episodes. Characters from Star Wars have appeared. Characters from the Muppets have appeared. Cartoon characters from 100 different shows have been part of Family Guy cutaways and jokes. Each time, the show acts as if those characters exist in the Family Guy world. But when it comes to the actual canon of crossovers, the show never clarifies which ones count. Are Bart and Stewie friends in the current Family Guy canon? Based on The Simpsons guy, yes. Have they met since? The show does not really say. Are The Simpsons part of the larger Seth MacFarlane cartoon universe that includes Cleveland and Stan Smith? Unclear. The writers have never answered. There is one more detail about The Simpsons guy worth mentioning. At the end of the episode, Peter and Homer's fight destroys a lot of Springfield. Buildings are wrecked, people are injured, there are real consequences to the battle. And then the episode ends, and the two families go their separate ways, and Family Guy never mentions Springfield again. If The Simpsons really exist in the Family Guy world, and Peter just had a 44-minute adventure in their town, he should remember it. He should reference it. He should mention Homer or Bart or Lisa in later episodes. He does not once. After The Simpsons guy aired, Family Guy went back to acting like The Simpsons do not exist, just like it did before the crossover. That is maybe the strangest part of the whole thing. The crossover did not change anything. The two families met, they fought, they became friends at the end, and then nothing. The worlds went back to being separate. The canon went back to being unclear. So what is the real status of The Simpsons and Family Guy canon? The show has shown us that Peter appeared in Springfield. The show has shown us that Homer appeared in Quahog. The show has shown us a 44-minute episode where the two families met for the first time. And the show has also shown us that none of these things matter because the two worlds remain separate in every other episode. That is not a canon. That is a mess. The only time the show is honest about this mess is when it comments on it through jokes. In a later episode, Peter makes a reference to having met The Simpsons, and other characters are confused. In another episode, the show jokes that the crossover never really happened. These jokes suggest that even the writers know they created an unsolvable problem. They know they cannot decide what counts. All of this is really just a symptom of a bigger issue. Family Guy treats its own canon as a suggestion. It is willing to rewrite history whenever it helps a specific episode. The Simpsons guy is the biggest example because it rewrote 14 years of crossover history in one 44-minute special. But the pattern is everywhere. Every time Family Guy does something that feels like a huge event, it usually ends up breaking some earlier rule the show had set for itself. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And if you thought the show was bad at keeping its relationships with other cartoons straight, wait until you see how bad it is at keeping track of its own neighborhood. Because there is one house on Spooner Street that has been destroyed so many times, in so many different ways, that it should have been reduced to rubble years ago. It is always rebuilt by the next episode. Nobody ever sees the construction workers. Nobody ever files an insurance claim. And the man who lives in it has kept falling out of the same bathtub in the same spot for more than 20 years, even after he moved to a different state. Section 10. The Cleveland house that cannot stop being destroyed, and every other running gag the show quietly broke. Cleveland Brown lived at 31 Spooner Street for the first 7 seasons of Family Guy. His house was right next to Peter's, and for those 7 seasons, a very specific joke happened over and over again. The joke goes like this. Something crazy happens in the neighborhood. Usually Peter is involved. Some kind of disaster, a stolen animal, a car crash, a rocket, a flying object. Whatever the cause, the disaster ends up crashing into Cleveland's house. The whole front wall of his house falls away. The floor of his bathroom tilts. And there, sitting in his bathtub, up on the second floor, is Cleveland taking a bath. Cleveland yells out the same line every time. He says, "What the hell?" and then slides down the tilted floor as his bathtub slips off the edge and crashes to the ground in front of his house. As the tub is falling, he yells, "No, no, 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 no," and then lands with a thud. This is called the bathtub gag. It is one of the most famous running jokes in the history of Family Guy. Fans love it. The writers have used it more than a dozen times across the show's run, but it is also one of the most broken things in the entire show. Let's start with the most basic question. How does his house keep getting rebuilt? Every time the gag happens, the front wall is completely destroyed. The bathroom is exposed. The bathtub is shattered on the lawn. This is not minor damage. This is a collapsed house, the kind of damage that in real life would require weeks or months of construction to fix, plus a huge insurance claim, plus permits from the town, plus contractors, plus new materials. In Family Guy, the house is always fixed by the next episode. Nobody ever sees workers repairing it. Cleveland never misses any time from his job to deal with it. He never complains about how expensive it is. He never yells at Peter for damaging his property. The house just snaps back to normal every single time. The first time the gag happened was in a Season 3 episode called Hell Comes to Quahog. Peter buys a tank at a car dealership. He drives it around. He accidentally blows up the front of Cleveland's house with the tank's cannon. Cleveland falls out of the bathtub. It is a shocking moment. It is supposed to be a rare disaster. Peter is genuinely horrified. The second time it happens was in Season 3 too, in an episode called Barely Legal. Peter steals a giraffe from a zoo. The giraffe is scared by Quagmire and runs away. It stumbles backward into Cleveland's house. The wall collapses. The bathtub falls. Cleveland makes a note that he really needs to stop taking baths whenever Peter is doing anything nearby. By the third or fourth time, Cleveland's reaction stops making sense, because a real person, after having their home destroyed twice in a short period by the same neighbor, would do something about it. They would move. They would sue. They would change their bathing schedule. They would at least stop keeping their bathtub on the second floor near the front wall, in the exact spot where it seems to be destroyed every month. Cleveland does none of those things. He keeps bathing in the same tub, in the same spot, in the same house with the same weak front wall. He does this for 7 seasons. The bathtub gag happens again and again and again. Every time he is caught off guard. Every time he reacts as if this is the first time it has ever happened. Every time the house is magically fixed for the next episode. Now, here is where the plot hole opens up further. In 2009, Cleveland left Quahog. He got his own spin-off show called The Cleveland Show. He moved to a town called Stool Bend, Virginia, which is far away from Rhode Island. He bought a new house there with his new wife and new family. That new house was supposed to be his fresh start. The bathtub gag followed him. In a Family Guy episode called Spies Reminiscent of Us, which aired in Season 5, Stewie and Brian are trying to redirect a missile heading toward Earth. They need it to land somewhere it will not cause too much harm. Through a series of events, the missile flies across the country and lands directly on Cleveland's new house in Stool Bend, Virginia. The bathtub gag happens. Cleveland falls out of the tub in exactly the same way, in a completely different state, hundreds of miles away from Peter. This is physically impossible. Peter did not cause the missile to hit Cleveland's house. Stewie and Brian did. And yet Cleveland, in his new life, in his new house, in a new state, is still falling out of the same bathtub. The universe itself seems to have decided that wherever Cleveland bathes, His house will be destroyed at some point, no matter where he lives. That is already strange. It gets stranger. In a Family Guy episode called Brian's Got a Brand New Bag, Peter is watching a movie. Something crazy happens. A car crashes. The car flies out of control and smashes into Cleveland's old empty house in Quahog. Cleveland does not live there anymore. He has moved to Virginia, but the house is still standing. And when the car hits it, the now empty bathtub on the second floor falls out of the wall and crashes to the ground, exactly like in every previous bathtub gag. The bathtub is still there. It is still in the same spot. It is still connected to the same weak part of the wall. After it lands, Peter says, "Oh, that's right. Cleveland moved," as if the show itself is pointing out the plot hole. Nobody has been using that bathtub for months, but somebody has been keeping it up there in the same spot, waiting for the next time it needs to fall. Then, Cleveland eventually moves back to Quahog. His spin-off show ended. He came back to Family Guy. He took his old house back at 31 Spooner Street. The bathtub gag kept going. It also became something even darker. In one episode of the Cleveland show, the same bathtub gag happens, but this time it is not Cleveland in the bathtub. It is his ex-wife, Loretta. She slides down the collapsed floor, the bathtub falls, and she hits the ground. Unlike Cleveland, she does not survive. She is killed by the fall. The show treats it as a joke, but it is also the canonical death of a character who is part of the original Family Guy cast. Think about that. The same running gag that Cleveland has survived a dozen times kills his ex-wife the first time she experiences it. The house is the same, the bathtub is the same, the angle of the fall is the same. The only thing different is who is in the tub, and that is enough to make the difference between a laugh and a death. That is a plot hole inside a plot hole, because if Loretta can die from the bathtub fall, then Cleveland should have died any of the dozen times it happened to him. He should have died the very first time, in Hell Comes to Quahog, back in Season 3. Now, let's zoom out, because this is the final section, and the bathtub gag is just one example of the show's larger problem. Cleveland is a character who has drifted across realities. His speech pattern is another example. Cleveland talks slowly. He drags his words out. It is a defining part of his voice. In a Family Guy episode called Death Lives, there is a flashback to Peter meeting Cleveland in the 1970s. In that flashback, Cleveland is already talking slowly the same way he does in the present. That is the story. But then, in a Season 4 episode called Blind Ambition, there is a different flashback. This one shows Cleveland as a fast-talking auctioneer earlier in his life. He speaks quickly, rapidly, at high speed. A totem pole then falls on his head, and the injury is what causes him to start talking slowly from that point on. These are two different origins for the same voice. In one, Cleveland was always slow. In the other, he got that way from head trauma. Then, the Cleveland show has its own version. In its first episode, we see Cleveland as a teenager already talking slowly, which matches the Death Lives version, but not the Blind Ambition version. The show has 3 different explanations for why Cleveland sounds the way he does, and none of them match. Let's look at a few more tangled threads in the show before we wrap up. Adam West was the mayor of Quahog for most of the show's run. He was voiced by the real actor Adam West, who played Batman in the 1960s show. Adam West passed away in real life in 2017. The show paid tribute to him, but Mayor West, the character, kept appearing in episodes after that, sometimes in ghost form, and sometimes not. The show could not decide if he was dead or alive. He was killed on screen, and then showed up alive again, and then was referenced as dead, and then appeared as a ghost, and then appeared without any acknowledgement of being dead at all. Another character, Diane Simmons, the news anchor, was murdered in a full, serious episode called "And Then There Were Fewer." This was a big deal. The show made it feel like a real murder mystery. She was actually killed off. But Diane's name continues to pop up in later episodes in confusing ways. Flashbacks use her. Characters reference her being around. The show is not consistent. Then there is the house itself. Peter and Lois's house, the one everyone associates with Family Guy. The layout of the house has changed dozens of times across the show. The kitchen door sometimes leads to the backyard. Sometimes it leads to the dining room. Meg's bedroom is upstairs in some episodes. It is shown to have a window that should not exist based on the outside shape of the house. In one season, one episode, the welfare check sent to Peter is addressed to 72 Spooner Street. In every other episode of the show, the Griffins live at 31 Spooner Street. Two different addresses, neither ever explained. Peter's jobs are another mess. He started at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory in Season 1. Then he worked at a brewery. Then he worked on a fishing boat. Then he worked at a carnival. Then back at the toy factory. Then at the brewery again. He changes jobs in the middle of episodes sometimes, with no transition scenes. Some of these jobs happen at the same time. The show never explains how he manages to hold 3 jobs at once, or which one is his real current job. There is a Griffin baby that appeared in one episode and was never seen again. In a Season 1 episode called The Sun Also Draws, Peter mentions in passing that he had another child who died. The child is never named, the circumstances are never explained, the episode moves on, and the show never brings it up again. A dead Griffin child casually mentioned once, forever unresolved. Then we get to the biggest running joke Family Guy ever pulled on itself, an episode called Back to the Pilot, which aired in Season 10. In that episode, Brian and Stewie use the time machine to travel back to the very first episode of Family Guy, which aired in January 1999. They walk around the old Griffin house, they see their younger selves, they see the old Peter, the old Lois, the old Chris, Meg, and Stewie, all drawn in the rougher style of the Season 1 animation. The joke of the episode is that Brian and Stewie openly make fun of how different everything looked back then. They point out that the house has changed. They point out that the characters talk differently. They point out that the animation was lower quality. They point out that the jokes back then were much longer, with cutaways that lasted forever and had no purpose. They are laughing at their own show, using their own time machine inside their own episode. This episode is the show's most honest moment about all of the plot holes we have been covering. It is Family Guy looking at Family Guy and saying, "Yes, we know, our past does not match our present, and we think that is funny." But an honest joke is not the same thing as a solution. Back to the Pilot does not fix any of the plot holes in the show. It just points at them and winks. The Stan Thompson problem is still there. The Brian origin story is still a mess. Kevin Swanson still has 2 versions of himself. Bonnie still spent 10 years pregnant. Quagmire is still 61 years old and 18 in 1984. Cleveland's house still gets destroyed and rebuilt. None of this gets resolved. And at the end of Back to the Pilot, the 2 Stewies end up meeting multiple future versions of themselves from different timelines. Dozens of Stewies and Brians show up. The whole episode gets tangled up in its own time travel rules. The time machine keeps being used in later episodes too, despite supposedly being destroyed before and after Brian's death. Nobody ever explains how it keeps coming back. If you have listened to this whole video, you now know the full map. Peter has 2 fathers, but a whole family tree of impossible ancestors. Brian has 3 separate origin stories, none of which can all be true. Stewie's head was either born that way or shaped by hitting a ceiling. Meg's real father is a man named Stan Thompson that the show has refused to show us in over 20 years. Quagmire is 61 years old, according to his driver's license, and also Peter's teenage classmate in 1984. Bonnie was pregnant for a decade. Kevin Swanson died in Iraq, came back with a fake coma story, admitted he went AWOL, and then had a second version of himself show up at the same door in the same episode. Brian died, got replaced by a whole new dog, came back through time travel, and the replacement somehow still exists in later seasons. The Simpsons had already met the Griffins 4 times before their big first meeting episode. Cleveland's house has been destroyed a dozen times and always rebuilt by morning. None of this is a mistake. That is the most important thing to understand. Family Guy is a show that knows exactly what it is doing. The writers know the contradictions are there. Seth MacFarlane has admitted in public that they do not care about keeping the timeline straight. The show has built an entire identity around being inconsistent on purpose. In their minds, every episode should stand alone. If a joke works, use it. If a character death gets ratings, do it. If time travel can undo the death later, use that too. Do not worry about how it all fits together, because it is not supposed to fit together. That is also the reason this video works, because there is no single answer to any of it. There is no final resolution. There is no big reveal at the end that ties everything together. Family Guy will never fix any of this. In 20 more seasons, Peter will still have 2 fathers. Stewie will still have a fake British accent and a possibly squashed head. Meg will still have a biological father named Stan Thompson that she will probably never meet. Cleveland's house will still fall down in every other episode and be standing again before the credits roll. The mess is the show. The show is the mess. And the show does not care because it never has, and it never will. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.